So the year is 2012. PewDiePie is booming.
Hey, how's it going, bros?
My name is Markiplier.
Psy's Gangnam Style just hit 1 billion views.
Oppan Gangnam Style.
The first Avengers was just released.
I'm always angry.
You'd be playing Temple Run on your iPhone 5. But in my case, I was locked in my room playing some of the best games that would ever drop, even to this day. 2012 was kind of wild for gaming. I feel like every month there was something huge dropping, and it was just such a good time to be a gamer. So, we're going to jump into why 2012 was one of the best years for gaming and look back on some of the games that made it really stand out. Just a side note, I'm not going to spoil any games in this series because even me to this day, I'm buying old 360 games and loving the experience, even the ones that I haven't played. So I'm not really going to spoil anything. I will touch on the stories though. Now I'm going to start on a game that was seen as kind of the end for a franchise for many, and that is Halo 4. Halo 4 was a big deal in 2012. It was the first Halo game developed by 343 Industries that now a lot of people aren't too happy with. We miss the Bungie Halo games.
Wake up,
Bungie.
I need you.
And back then, we even missed it. For the most part, Halo 4 delivered. It continued the story of Master Chief, and the focus was more personal this time around, especially with the relationship between the Chief and Cortana. If you remember this story, it was actually pretty good, and it's quite memorable for me. When it came to gameplay, Halo 4 felt tighter than ever. It had classic Halo mechanics, but with a fresh layer of polish. And for the 360 time, the visuals were seriously impressive. The multiplayer brought back some of the old school Halo fun, while adding new mechanics like loadouts, which there was a bit of controversy for hardcore fans. It's almost like they tried to take a page out of Call of Duty's book with that one. With that being said though, Halo 4 pulled in strong reviews, with scores like 9.8 from IGN and 9 from GameStop. They praised its campaign and multiplayer modes. That can't be said for all the future Halo games though. I feel like this really was the peak for Halo, and ever since then, it was downhill. Another game that dropped that wasn't too hyped, but definitely got good reception, was Spec Ops The Line. Now, this is one of those games that catches you off guard. On the surface, it looks like a standard third-person military shooter, but it is way more than that.
You okay?
Do I look okay to you?
Without spoiling anything, I would just say that the game does some things with its narrative that are seriously bold and had people talking about it for a long time after they finished it. I'm still even seeing YouTube videos on it now about people getting their mind blown. The gameplay is solid, it's a cover-based shooter, squad mechanic, and some intense set pieces. But of course, like I just mentioned, people are still talking about this game because of the story. It's one of those rare games that leave a lasting impact, especially with how it deals with the morality of war and the choices that you make. Now, it didn't get the highest review scores at the time, around 8s all around, but it's one of the ones that hold up. People are still talking about this. I remember this. Now, the gameplay might feel a little dated today, but the story is definitely not. I would play this if you've never played it. Moving on to the next game, COD Black Ops 2. Call of Duty Black Ops 2.
We'll always need men like us. Those who are willing to do what others cannot.
Call of Duty fans were eating with this one, and it is arguably the best Call of Duty ever made. They took the classic COD formula and added heaps of fresh twists that kept things very interesting. Of course, the multiplayer was the main attraction, and Black Ops 2 definitely delivered. It was super fast-paced, it was chaotic, and had some of the best maps in the series. The classic Pick 10 systems let players customize their loadouts more than ever before. And for the first time, the game introduced score streaks, so instead of regular kill streaks, you capture a flag that gives you 100 points, and so on. Now, for a Call of Duty game, it actually got strong reviews. It got a 9.3 from IGN and a 9 from GameSpot. I think everyone in the fanbase loved this game. The zombies fans, the campaign fans, and the multiplayer fans. In fact, the community online was booming too. FaZe Clan, all that sort of stuff. Does it hold up to this day? Definitely. The multiplayer is not as active as it once was, but I've been playing games here and there, and people are still playing. People are still sniping, doing the classic riot shield stuff. Like, everything's the same. You'll just take longer time to find a match. Oh, and the campaign, you had multiple storylines. That was unheard of for Call of Duty. Now, a kind of sleeper hit in 2012, no pun intended, was Sleeping Dogs.
I'm still here.
It didn't have the same kind of hype as some of the other open world games, but once people started playing it, it gained a loyal following. Now, this was a game set in Hong Kong. You play as an undercover cop infiltrating the triads, and with the mix of hand-to-hand combat, gunplay, and open-world exploration, it really was unique. A lot of people compared this game to GTA. The combat was a standout, it was so fluid and satisfying, and the game also had a great story, with a strong cast of characters. Now this game got an 8.5 from IGN and a 9 from Game Informer, and is still one of those games that people look back on fondly. It was followed by some DLC in the Definitive Edition that added more content, so if you're looking to play it, it definitely holds up, and if you're into open world games with strong narratives, this is definitely worth checking out. Now before Rockstar Games dropped GTA 5 a year later, they released Max Payne 3. Now Max Payne 3 was a bit of a departure from the earlier games in the series, but I think it was in a good way. You could feel the Rockstar influence all over the game. It's still a third-person shooter, but the story is more darker, more grittier, and more grounded. Max is older, more broken, and dealing with some serious personal demons. The gameplay was super slick. Bullet time was back, and the gunplay was super satisfying. The story had that classic noir feel, but set in a new location, Brazil, and the action sequences were super intense. Now, just like the other games I've been mentioning, IGN gave it a 9, GameSpot gave it an 8.5. People didn't think it was as groundbreaking as the original, but to me, that was the first one I played, and it was still a fantastic game that holds up today. Now, back in 2012, this game was kind of iffy and meh, but I've recently jumped back into it, and this is Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. Now, this one's kind of underrated. It was an RPG set in a massive fantasy world with rich lore and a combat system that felt way more fluid and fast-paced than most RPGs at the time. The story might not have been the deepest, but the gameplay made up for it. The way you could mix up your combat styles, switching between magic, swords, and bows, gave the game this satisfying flow that's unmatched. The art was actually by Todd McFarlane, and the reviews were decent. You got 8s all around the board. Unfortunately though, this game didn't do great commercially, and it ended up leading into the downfall of its developer. But it's one of those games that if you missed out on, it's still worth revisiting, and there's even a remaster right now that you should definitely play. And of course, we can't talk about 2012 without mentioning Diablo 3. After a decade-long wait, Blizzard finally dropped the next chapter in the Diablo series, and fans were hyped. But Diablo 3 had kind of a rough launch. If you were gaming in 2012, you probably remember the infamous Error 37, where you just could not log in. There was also an auction house drama where players could buy and sell items for real money, which didn't sit well with a lot of fans, and, that makes sense. But, once the dust settled and Blizzard made some big changes, Diablo 3 really came into its own. The combat was so fast, the loot was addictive, and the world of Sanctuary was as dark and as atmospheric as ever. They followed up with the Reaper of Souls expansion, which many say saved the game, adding even more content and fixing a lot of the early issues. Reviews were mixed early on, you got 8.5s and all that, but later the patches and expansions really turned it into something special. I wonder if they jump back into reviews, whether they would give it more than that. But Diablo 3 is still widely regarded as one of the best action RPGs out there, even if Diablo 4 has now taken the spotlight. Moving on to another MMO type beat, you've got Guild Wars 2. And to be honest, it was actually surprisingly one of the biggest games to come out of 2012. Guild Wars 2 brought some fresh ideas to the table. It was an MMO that didn't follow the same grind-heavy structure as its competitors. Instead, it offered players dynamic events where quests would pop up in real time and change the world around you. The game also had a unique take on PvP, with large-scale worlds versus world battles where entire servers would face off against each other. And on top of that, the game didn't have a monthly subscription fee, which was huge at the time. Reviews were great, it got 9s and 10s from various outlets, and the game has evolved a lot since its launch, with its multiple expansions, and even today, Guild Wars 2 has a dedicated player base and remains one of the more accessible MMOs for newcomers. Now, this is more of a personal one, I don't know if many of you played it, but The Darkness 2. It's one of those games that kind of flew under the radar in 2012, but definitely deserves more attention. It's a first-person shooter where you play as a character called Jackie. He's a mob boss with these supernatural powers called The Darkness. You can use your demonic powers to tear through enemies in brutal ways, all while dealing with a personal story that dives deep into loss and revenge. If you played the first game, you know that the story is so good. The game's art style is really unique. It's got a comic book vibe to it with cel-shaded sort of graphics that make it stand out from other shooters. The story, while short, is dark and emotional and engaging with super strong voice acting that really helps you connect with the characters. Now, it didn't get the highest scores, probably around like 7 and 8s from IGN and GameStop, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're into story-driven shooters. Plus, like I said, if you like the first game, Darkness 2 is perfect. It just builds on that foundation in some interesting ways. Another huge game we've got is Far Cry 3. I've made a video on this in the past, but this game is incredible.
I like this phone. This is a nice phone.
Obviously, you've got Vast as the villain, one of the greatest villains in all of gaming, and the open world that this game was set in was just so structured and everything just worked so well. You had so much freedom, like tackling missions, story, hunting, and now this game got absolutely killer reviews, with 9s and 10s all over the board, and it quickly became a fan favorite. And to this day, I think Far Cry 3 is even better than all the other Far Crys. And yes, it still holds up today. The gameplay, the exploration, the freedom of choice, it's all just as satisfying as ever. Although it feels slightly dated in mechanics, it's still definitely playable. And if you missed it back in the day, you should definitely play it now. Now, one game that I also have to mention is Dishonored. At the time, it kind of flew under the radar like most of these games, but it was such a good game. It combined stealth and action in a way that gave players tons of freedom. You could literally sneak through every mission without killing anyone, or you could just go in and destroy everything. It was totally up to you. The world building in Dishonored was amazing. The plague-ridden city of Dunwall had this gritty steampunk vibe that felt so unique. And the powers you could use, like teleporting short distances or controlling rats, gave you a lot of creative ways to handle situations. It got really solid reviews at the time. 8.5, 9.2 from IGN, and it ended up winning a lot of Best Action Game awards. The praise mostly came from the game's freedom of choice and level design. As for whether it holds up, I'd say definitely. The stealth mechanics and level designs are still top tier. Dishonored 2 came out a few years later and was also well received, but for a lot of the fans, the original Dishonored is where the series really shined. If you never played it, it's worth a look, especially if you're into stealth games. Now, one of my absolute personal favorites that I've played multiple times is Borderlands 2. Obviously, the first Borderlands was a sleeper hit. It was a mixed RPG with first-person shooter elements and had a very distinct art style. But Borderlands 2 took that all and dialed it up to 100. Gearbox knew they had something good, and they went all in. The humor, the co-op gameplay, the ridiculous amounts of loot, it all made Borderlands 2 addictive as hell. Playing with friends in co-op is easily one of the best parts of experience. And the writing was more refined this time around. The game gave us characters like Handsome Jack, who ended up being one of the more memorable villains in gaming. Review-wise, Borderlands 2 was sitting in an 8.5 to 9.5 range. People praised the co-op, the gun variety, the humor, but to be honest, some people found the humor a hit or a miss. It holds up extremely well today, especially if you're into looter shooters. The gunplay feels amazing and the art style is so unique. It has such a fun and chaotic energy. The series went on to have a solid run with the Borderlands games, but to be honest, I think it peaked at number 2. And of course, you've got Mass Effect 3. It's the thrilling conclusion to BioWare's epic sci-fi trilogy that obviously began with Mass Effect 1 in 2007. Now, this game was released early in 2012, around March, and it picks up exactly where Mass Effect 2 left off, plunging players back into the role of Commander Shepard. I remember when this game dropped, it was pretty culturally significant. You know, the battle against the Reapers, the new combat, the new relationships you could make, it was all amazing in my opinion. A lot of people weren't happy with the ending of the game, and that completely makes sense, and I don't disagree, but I also want to say, it was sort of a good conclusion. The gameplay was ramped up perfectly for the new gen. Regardless, the game remains the landmark in gaming history, embodying the rich storytelling and complex moral dilemmas that the series is known for. The vibe, the atmosphere of this sci-fi game was unmatched. The gunplay felt really tight, and I remember spending a lot of time in the co-op mode as well. So yeah, goes without saying that 2012 was absolutely stacked with games that really left a mark on the industry. Whether you were into shooters, RPGs, MMOs, or even something more story-driven, there was something for everyone that year. Far Cry 3, Black Ops 2, Halo 4, and even more underrated titles like Kingdoms of Amalur, and The Darkness 2 are still talked about today, and for a good reason. And it's wild that a lot of these games still hold up or have had remasters or expansions that keep them relevant even today in 2024. It's crazy to look back at a single year and just see how much quality content came out of it compared to when you look at a year now and it's like, oh yeah, we got 2 good games, 3 good games. Anyway, let me know in the comments which game from 2012 were your favorites and if I missed any. Thanks for sticking around the video this long and watching. Hopefully I catch you in the next videos. Peace.